You think you can just walk away? Don't you dare look at me like that.
No.
No, you don't understand. You have to. Get your hands off me. I told you I'm not leaving. You're coming with us now. Don't fight back. You're hurting me. Let go of my arm. Stop resisting. Keep moving. Let's go. Stop hurting me. He's out of control.
Boots. Keep your hands where I can see them. The words came out flat, rehearsed, like Deputy Chief Marcus Whitfield had said them 100 times before, because he had. Boots. What he didn't know was that the woman standing in front of him, wrists about to be zip-tied in the marble lobby of the Ridgeview Convention Center, had spent the last 6 years signing off on federal wire warrants that could unravel every dirty dollar his department had ever touched. Boots. The crowd around them had gone completely still. 300 guests, half-eaten canapes, a keynote speech interrupted mid-sentence. Nobody moved. Boots. Nobody breathed. Renata Ashworth-Coles did not raise her voice. She'd learned a long time ago that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one who wins it. Boots. 2 hours earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Renata had walked into the Ridgeview Convention Center on East Trade Street in Charlotte, wearing a plain charcoal blazer, flat shoes, and a canvas tote bag with a coffee stain shaped like Ohio on the side pocket. Boots. She was there to deliver the closing keynote at the Carolinas Regional Policing and Civil Rights Symposium, a 3-day conference that drew police chiefs, prosecutors, and community organizers from 6 states. Boots. She'd asked the organizers twice to leave her name off the printed program until the final hour. Just list the topic. Boots. Not the speaker. She had her reasons. She always had her reasons. Renata was 44 years old, 5'6", and carried herself like someone who had learned to take up exactly the amount of space she needed, and not 1 inch more. Boots. Her mother, Delphine Ashworth, had been a public school teacher in Rock Hill, South Carolina, for 31 years, and had once told a 9-year-old Renata, after a police officer had pulled their car over for the 3rd time that month, for no reason anyone could name, baby, they will decide who you are before you open your mouth. Boots. Your job is to make sure that decision is wrong every single time. Renata had never forgotten it. She'd built a career on it. Boots. She checked her phone once in the lobby. A text from her assistant, Priya Anand, back at the field office. Wheels up for D. Boots. C at 6 tomorrow. Attorney General wants the Whitfield file reviewed before your flight. She typed back a single-word copy and slid the phone into her tote next to a small enamel pin shaped like a magnolia blossom that had belonged to her mother. Boots. She touched it once, the way she always did, before walking into a room full of strangers who didn't know what she carried with her. Boots. The pin would matter later. Remember the pin. Delphine Ashworth had died 3 years earlier, on a Tuesday in February, in a hospital room in Rock Hill, with Renata holding one hand and a hospice nurse holding the other. Boots. In the last conscious hour, Delphine had not talked about her 31 years teaching 4th grade, or the 2 husbands, or the house on Cherry Road she'd paid off 11 years before she needed to. Boots. She'd talked about the traffic stops. All of them. She remembered everyone by year, by officer's tone of voice, by the exact words used to ask for her license and registration when she hadn't done a single thing wrong. Boots. You count them, Delphine had said, her voice thin as paper, because if you don't count them, they start to feel normal. Boots. And the day they feel normal is the day you've already lost something you can't get back. Renata had counted. Boots. She still counted. It was, in its own strange way, the reason she had ended up exactly where she was. Not just an agent, but the one who built the cases nobody else wanted to touch, the internal patterns, the department-wide reviews that took years instead of weeks, because the truth she was chasing rarely announced itself all at once. Boots. She did the slow work, the quiet work, the kind of work that never made headlines, until suddenly, all at once it did. Boots. She had been offered a security detail more than once, a driver, a second agent shadowing her in public spaces, standard protocol for someone at her level. Boots. She'd turned it down every time. If I show up somewhere with an entourage, she'd told her supervisor, Assistant Director Colm Faraday, I stopped being able to see what I came to see. Boots. People behave differently around power they can spot. I need them to behave the way they actually behave. Faraday hadn't loved the answer, but he'd stopped arguing about it 2 years ago. Boots. It was, in hindsight, the exact quality that had made Marcus Whitfield so certain, so fast, that something about her didn't add up. Boots. At 11:14 a.m., Renata stepped out of the ladies' room on the second floor, badge lanyard tucked inside her blazer out of habit, and nearly collided with a hotel security guard hauling a rack of folding chairs. Boots. She apologized. He apologized. And that was that, except that Deputy Chief Marcus Whitfield, standing 20 feet away near the escalator with two of his officers, watched the whole exchange with the particular kind of attention men like him, reserved for people they had already decided did not belong. Boots. Whitfield was 51, silver at the temples, the kind of build that came from 20 years in the department gym, and none of it from actual patrol work anymore. Boots. He'd run the 3rd Ward precinct for 11 years. He had commendations on his wall, and buried 3 folders deep in a filing cabinet that Internal Affairs had requested twice and never received. 4 separate misconduct complaints that had all quietly disappeared. Boots. He kept a framed photograph on his desk of himself shaking hands with a former mayor at a Fraternal Order of Police banquet, and beneath it, in a small brass frame his wife had bought him for his 50th birthday, a single line. Surface above Felfon. Boots. He believed it. That was the part almost no one who worked for him fully understood. Whitfield did not think of himself as corrupt. Boots. He thought of himself as efficient. Boots. The towing contracts, the seized asset fees that never quite made it into the official ledger, the 4 buried complaints. In his mind, all of it was the necessary machinery of keeping a hard precinct running. The kind of pragmatic compromises a man made when the budget never matched the workload and nobody upstairs wanted to hear about it. Boots. He had convinced himself, slowly, over 11 years, that the rules were for people who hadn't yet learned how the job actually worked. Boots. His officers loved him the way people love a coach who wins ugly. He covered for them. He vouched for them at review boards. Boots. In exchange, he expected loyalty that asked no questions, and for 11 years he had gotten exactly that. That's the 3rd time I've seen her wandering this floor, Whitfield said to Officer Dale Kowalczyk, his voice low but not low enough. Boots. No badge on her, no lanyard visible, just walking around like she owns the place. You want me to check her out? Boots. Kowalczyk asked. Whitfield's eyes tracked Renata as she crossed toward the escalator, tote bag over one shoulder, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, which, ironically, was exactly the kind of calm that made men like Whitfield suspicious. Boots. Calm to him meant something to hide. Yeah, Whitfield said. Let's find out who she thinks she is. The first approach was almost polite. Boots. Almost. Ma'am, can I see some ID? Kowalczyk asked, stepping into Renata's path at the base of the escalator. Renata stopped. Boots. She didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't do any of the small defensive things people do when they feel cornered. Boots. She simply looked at him, the way a teacher looks at a student who has asked a question whose answer they already know. Boots. Is there a reason you're asking? She said. Just doing a security check for the event. I'm a registered speaker at this symposium, Renata said. Boots. My credentials are in my bag. If you need to see them, I'm happy to show you. But I'd like to understand why you singled me out of 300 people in this lobby. Boots. Kowalczyk's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being asked why. Ma'am, I need you to open the bag. This is where the first small crack in the day appeared, though almost no one noticed it. Boots. A woman near the coffee station, Yolanda Briggs, 49, a victim advocate from Gastonia, who had spent the morning listening to panels about implicit bias in traffic stops, had stopped mid-sip of her coffee and was watching. Boots. She didn't say anything. She just watched, the cup frozen an inch from her lips, because she recognized the shape of what was happening before it had fully happened yet. Boots. Renata opened the bag herself calmly and let Kowalczyk see inside. A laptop, a legal pad, a hotel key card, the enamel magnolia pin still sitting in the corner pocket, a badge wallet zipped shut at the bottom that neither man bothered to ask about. Boots. Satisfied, she asked. For now, Kowalczyk said, which was not an apology, and both of them knew it. Renata walked away first. Boots. That mattered to her. Not storming off, not lingering, just walking at her own pace toward the escalator, because giving him her anger would have been giving him something he hadn't earned. Boots. But Whitfield wasn't finished. Whitfield was never finished with people he'd already decided about. By 12:40 p.m., during the lunch break, Whitfield had pulled Kowalczyk and a second officer, Ray Delgado, into a side hallway near the loading dock. Boots. I want eyes on her, he said. Something's off. She's got a badge wallet in that bag and no ID out. Boots. That's not how legitimate people carry themselves. Could just be conference staff, Delgado offered. Conference staff don't carry federal-style badge wallets, Whitfield said, though he had never actually seen what was inside it. Boots, trust me. 22 years on this job, I know when somebody's running a game. At 1:20 p.m., the second escalation happened, smaller than the first but sharper in a different way. Boots. Renata had gone to refill her water bottle at the station near the auditorium doors, when Whitfield approached her directly this time. No pretense of a routine check. Boots. You mind telling me what organization you're actually with? He asked, positioning himself just close enough to make the question feel like a demand rather than small talk. Boots. I'm listed in the program, Renata said. Panel 4330. That's not what I asked. It's the answer I'm giving you, Renata said, and there was something in her voice now. Not louder, not harder, just more precise, like a door closing with exact, controlled pressure instead of being slammed. Boots. I've shown you what was asked of me. I don't owe you a biography. Whitfield's mouth tightened. A small crowd of conference-goers nearby had slowed their conversation, sensing the temperature change without fully understanding it. Boots. People with nothing to hide don't usually mind a few questions, he said. People with badges don't usually need to ask the same question 3 times to the same person in 90 minutes, Renata replied. Boots. You've stopped me twice now. I'd think carefully before a third. It wasn't a threat. It didn't sound like one. Boots. But something about the stillness in her face when she said it made Whitfield's jaw work silently for a second, before he turned and walked away, already telling himself, the way he always told himself, that he was the one who'd shown restraint. Boots. The third escalation, the one that would matter most, was quieter still, and almost nobody saw it happen. At 2:05 p. Boots. Whitfield radioed the front desk of the hotel and asked off the record for a copy of the day's registered attendee list, specifically requesting any entries without a listed employer or agency. Boots. It was a small abuse of a small courtesy, hotel security cooperating with a uniformed officer without asking too many questions, but it meant that by 2:30 p. Boots. Whitfield was standing in a service corridor with a printed page in his hand, one name circled twice in blue pen. Boots. Employer. Blank. He stared at that blank field for a long time, the way a man stares at a puzzle piece that doesn't fit and decides, instead of questioning the puzzle, to force it anyway. Boots. Told you, he said to Kowalczyk, tapping the circled name. Something's off with her. What Whitfield didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Renata Ashworth-Coles had spent the lunch break on a video call in a side conference room with 3 people, Priya, back in D. Boots. C. A federal prosecutor named O.C. Batra, and a Charlotte Mecklenburg internal affairs liaison who had, 6 weeks earlier, quietly reached out to Renata's office about a pattern of complaints out of the 3rd Ward precinct that never seemed to go anywhere. Boots. Complaints from residents, mostly black and Latino, mostly on the west side of the city, about stops that went nowhere, evidence that appeared out of nowhere, and a captain who always seemed to know exactly how far he could push before someone above him would step in. Boots. Renata had come to Charlotte to give a keynote. But she had also come to Charlotte because Marcus Whitfield's name had been sitting in a federal case file for 4 months, and the timing of this symposium, in his city, in his convention center, with him providing security liaison for the event, was not an accident. Boots. It was bait, and Whitfield had just taken it. The forward hook of the afternoon arrived at 2:15 p.m. Boots. When Renata's phone buzzed with a message from O.C. Batra. Grand jury subpoena for precinct financial records approved. Executing at 4 p.m. today. Boots. Don't engage directly until then. Renata read it twice, slid the phone back into her tote, and walked into the auditorium to prepare for her 3:30 panel. Boots. She had no idea Whitfield was about to force her hand 2 hours early. At 3:02 p.m., during the transition between panels, the lobby crowd thickened again. Coffee refills, hallway conversations, laptops closing. Boots. Renata stepped out to take a call from Priya near a quiet alcove by the west stairwell, phone pressed to her ear, voice low. Boots. They're executing the subpoena at 4, she said. I need the 3rd Ward financials cross-referenced with the towing contract before I land in D. Boots. C. Tonight. She never saw Whitfield approaching from behind until his hand closed around her wrist. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside and come with us, Whitfield said, loud enough now for the hallway to hear. Loud enough that heads turned, loud enough that this was clearly no longer a security check. This was a performance. Boots. "I'm on a call," Renata said, voice level. "End it, now." Whitfield's grip tightened, not painfully, not yet, but with the unmistakable pressure of a man demonstrating who was in control. Boots. "Sir, you're going to want to let go of my wrist," Renata said. "Or what?" The alcove had gone silent, except for the faint, tinny sound of Priya's voice is still on the line. Unaware the call was no longer being listened to. Boots. This was the frozen moment. The air conditioning hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a hotel cartwheel squeaked once and stopped. Boots. Yolanda Briggs, still holding her now cold coffee, had drifted closer, phone rising slowly in her hand, not to intervene because she didn't have the standing to, but because some instinct told her, "Film this." Boots. "Somebody needs to see this." Kowalczyk and Delgado flanked Whitfield now, and what happened next happened fast. Cuffs out, wrist wrenched behind her back, Renata's tote bag yanked off her shoulder and dropped to the carpet, the badge wallet sliding halfway out of the unzipped pocket and landing face down, unseen by anyone in the chaos. Boots. "You have the right to remain silent," Whitfield began, already reciting it like he'd done this 1,000 times, already certain of the ending before it had even started. Boots. Renata said nothing. She did not struggle. She let herself be walked, cuffed, through a side exit near the loading dock, the same hallway Whitfield had used 2 hours earlier to plan exactly this, while 300 conference attendees stood frozen in the lobby behind her, phones raised, murmurs rising into a low, disbelieving roar. Boots. Nobody stopped it. That was the part that would matter most later. Not one uniformed officer in that hallway, not Kowalczyk, not Delgado, not the 2 hotel security guards who'd watched the whole thing unfold, said a single word. Boots. Among the crowd, frozen in the lobby, was Dr. Hamish Calloway, a criminology professor from Winthrop University, who had, 40 minutes earlier, been sitting in the front row of Renata's afternoon panel prep, watching her review notes with the quiet focus of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Boots. He had his phone in his hand, too, and for 1 full second, his thumb hovered over the record button before he lowered it, telling himself it wasn't his place, that campus security or hotel staff would surely step in, that a man in his position, tenure track, on a first-name basis with half the police chiefs in the room, speaking up might complicate things unnecessarily. Boots. He would spend the drive home that night replaying that hovering thumb, that half-second of hesitation, wondering what exactly he had been protecting by staying silent, and coming up, uncomfortably, with no good answer. Boots. Beside him stood a hotel event coordinator named Rosa Delacroix-Pham, 23 years old, 6 months into her first job out of college, who had watched the cuffs go on with her hand pressed flat against her own chest, as if holding something in. Boots. She thought about stepping forward. Boots. She thought about it hard enough that her feet actually shifted half a step in that direction. And then she thought about her manager, about the contract with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department that paid for 1/3 of the hotel's annual security detail, about the conversation she'd have to have if she interrupted a uniformed arrest in the middle of her own lobby. Boots. She stayed where she was. She would carry that half step for a long time, the same way Dr. Calloway would carry his hovering thumb. Not villains, either of them, just 2 people who had learned, the way most people learn, that staying quiet is so often mistaken for staying safe. Boots. Except one person did something. It wasn't much. It would never make the news, never get written up in any report. Boots. Yolanda Briggs, still holding her phone, still filming, knelt down by the fallen tote bag as the crowd began to disperse and, without a second thought, zipped the badge wallet, fully closed, and tucked it back inside the bag, before anyone could see what was printed across it. Boots. She didn't know why she did it. She just knew that whatever was written on that badge, it wasn't hers to reveal, and it wasn't Whitfield's to find first. Boots. The patrol car ride to the 3rd Ward precinct on Beattiesford Road took 9 minutes. Whitfield drove. Boots. Delgado rode in the passenger seat, glancing back every so often, unsettled by how still Renata sat, how her breathing never changed, how she looked out the window at the passing storefronts like a woman watching weather roll in, rather than a woman on her way to be booked. Boots. You want to make this easy on yourself, Whitfield said, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. You'll cooperate. Obstruction of a security operation, resisting a lawful order. That's already 2 charges. Boots. Don't make me add a 3rd. I didn't resist anything, Renata said. You were on a phone call I told you to end. Boots. You grabbed a woman's wrist in a hallway full of witnesses because she wouldn't hang up her phone fast enough for your liking, Renata said, still perfectly calm. Boots. I'd think carefully about which version of this story you want written down. Delgado shifted in his seat. Something about the way she said written down. Not told, not said. But written down sat wrong in his stomach, the way a word sits wrong when it means more than it says. Boots. They passed a corner store on Beattisford Road with a hand-painted mural of a woman holding a child, faded from years of Carolina sun, and Renata watched it slide by the window without comment. Boots. Whitfield glanced at her again in the mirror, unsettled by the silence, the way silence from someone he'd expected to be afraid always unsettled him. Boots. You know, he said, filling the quiet because he couldn't stand not filling it. Most people in your position would be a little more cooperative right about now. Boots. What position is that? Renata asked. Cuffed in the back of my car. I've been in worse positions, Renata said, and I imagine by the end of today you'll understand exactly what I mean by that. Boots. Whitfield laughed, short and humorless. That's supposed to scare me? No, Renata said. It's supposed to be true. Whether it scares you is entirely up to you. Boots. The car went quiet again. Delgado kept glancing between the road and the rearview mirror, an itch of unease building in his chest that he couldn't quite name yet. The sense, growing stronger with every passing block, that they had picked a fight with someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to win one. Boots. At a red light on Statesville Avenue, a Charlotte area transit bus pulled alongside them, and for 3 long seconds Renata's eyes met those of an elderly woman seated by the window, watching the patrol car with the particular, practiced blankness of someone who had seen this exact scene too many times to react to it anymore. Boots. Renata held her gaze until the light changed. Neither of them looked away first. At the precinct, Renata was processed like anyone else. Boots. Fingerprints. A mugshot under fluorescent light that made everyone look guilty. Boots. A young booking officer. Terrell Vance, 26, 8 months on the job, typed her name into the county system exactly as it appeared on the temporary conference badge clipped inside her jacket, because her real badge wallet was still zipped shut in the tote bag, now sitting in an evidence locker 3 rooms away. Boots. Renata Ashworth-Coles. The system hung for 4 full seconds. Then it hung for 4 more. Terrell frowned, retyped it, hit enter again. Boots. This time the screen didn't hang. It returned something else entirely. A red banner. A federal flag, a line of text that made his stomach drop somewhere near his shoes. Access restricted. Contact supervising agency before proceeding. Boots. Federal law enforcement personnel. Terrell said, to no one in particular. Hang on. He looked up. Whitfield was leaning against the counter 12 feet away, laughing about something with Kowalczyk, still riding the high of a clean arrest, still certain the story ended with him being right. Boots. It did not, Chief Terrell said. I think you need to see this. Whitfield ambled over, unbothered, the way a man walks toward a problem he's certain isn't actually a problem. Boots. He looked at the screen. His smile faded by degrees. Not all at once, the way a smile fades when someone tells a bad joke, but the way it fades when the floor tilts slightly beneath your feet and your body hasn't caught up to what your eyes already know. Boots. That's a glitch, Whitfield said. Run it again. Terrell ran it again, same result. Same red banner. Same 4 words that would end up meaning more to Marcus Whitfield's career than any commendation ever had. Federal law enforcement personnel. Boots. Get me the captain, Whitfield said, and for the first time all day, his voice had lost its certainty. Captain Rosalind Okafor arrived within 6 minutes, still in her street clothes, having been called in on her day off. Boots. She was 56, 29 years on the force, the kind of officer who had clawed her way to captain in a department that had not made it easy for a black woman to do so, and she had absolutely no patience left for men who made messes she then had to clean. Boots. Explain this to me slowly, Okafor said, standing in the small booking office, looking between the screen and Whitfield. She wouldn't hang up a phone call, Whitfield said. Boots. I told her to move. She didn't move fast enough, You put a federal agent in cuffs in front of 300 witnesses at a civil rights conference, Okafor said, because she was slow to hang up a phone call. Boots. The room went quiet. We don't know she's federal, Whitfield said. Systems glitch all the Marcus. Okafor's voice dropped, and something about the way she said his first name. Not Chief, not Whitfield, just Marcus, landed harder than any shout could have. Boots. I need you to understand something. I got a call 40 minutes ago, before any of this showed up on a screen. Boots. A federal prosecutor's office confirmed they're executing a subpoena on this precinct's financial records at 4 o'clock today. It is 3:51 right now. Boots. Whitfield said nothing. His face had gone the color of old drywall. Now walk me through, Okafor said, why the woman you dragged out of that convention center in cuffs might be connected to that. Boots. She wasn't asking a question. She already knew the answer, and the terrible, sinking silence in the room told her Whitfield was only now catching up. Boots. Down the hall in a holding room with a single steel table, Renata sat with her wrists still cuffed, waiting unbothered, the way a person waits for weather they already know is coming. Boots. A court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named Foster Nunkamelu, who had been assigned to at least 6 cases that week, sat across from her, flipping through a thin folder. Boots. They're charging you with obstruction and resisting, Nkamelu said. I have to be honest, Ms. Ashworth-Coles. If we can get you to take a plea on a reduced. Boots. I won't be taking a plea, Renata said. With respect, ma'am, the officer's report says, Mr. Nunkamelu, Renata said, and something in her tone made him stop flipping pages. Boots. In the next 15 minutes, someone is going to walk through that door and tell you exactly who I am. Boots. I'd rather you hear it from them than from me. It'll mean more. Nkamelu studied her for a long moment. Boots. You're not just a conference speaker, are you? No, Renata said, I'm not. Nkamelu sat back, rubbing his temple, the exhaustion of a public defender carrying 11 active cases settling over his face. Boots. Look, he said softer now, I've done this job for 9 years. I've represented people the system decided about before they ever opened their mouths. Boots. I've watched charges get written up in 15 minutes that took 2 years to unwind in court. If there's something I need to know to protect you right now, in this room, before that door opens, tell me. Boots. Renata studied him for a moment, weighing something. The charges against me will not survive contact with the truth, she said finally. Boots. But I need you to understand something else, Mr. Nkamelu, because I don't think you fully see it yet. This isn't really about me. Boots. What happened to me today happens to people in this city every week, who don't have a badge in their bag to make it stop. Boots. The only difference between me and the last 4 people your office defended out of that precinct is that I have proof, and they didn't. Boots. And Kamelu's pen had stopped moving. The 3rd ward cases, he said slowly, the dismissed ones, the ones that never made sense. Boots. Ask your office to pull the file on a man named Curtis Odom, Renata said. 11 days in county lockup last spring on a possession charge that got dropped for insufficient evidence. Boots. Ask them who processed his arrest. Nkamelu's face had gone very still. Whitfield, he said. You already knew that name mattered, Renata said. Boots. You just didn't know why yet. Down the hall, unheard by either of them, Captain Okafor was standing in her office doorway with her own copy of the subpoena paperwork spread across her desk, reading through preliminary documents that Batra's office had forwarded 20 minutes earlier as a courtesy before the formal execution. Boots. Her hands, normally steady after 29 years on the job, were pressed flat against the desk, bracing. 3 names on the preliminary list belonged to officers still on her active roster. Boots. One of them was Kowalczyk. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, the only visible sign that the ground beneath her department had just shifted, and then she straightened, because there was no version of the next hour that did not require her to be the person who stayed standing. Boots. At 3:58 p.m., the door opened. It wasn't Okafor. It was a man in a charcoal suit flanked by 2 others, all 3 wearing the unmistakable posture of federal agents who had run out of patience an hour ago and were now simply here to end this. Boots. He held up a badge. I'm Special Agent O.C. Batra, FBI Charlotte Field Office, he said. I need everyone in this room except the detainee to step outside. Boots now. Nkamelu stood so fast, his chair scraped the floor. Okafor, who had followed the agents in, stared at Renata with an expression that was rapidly rearranging itself from confusion into dawning, cold understanding. Boots. Director Batra said, stepping forward, reaching for the small key ring on his belt. I am so sorry it took us this long. Boots. The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. Director Okafor's mouth opened slightly. Nkamelu, halfway to the door, froze completely. Boots. Terrell Vance, hovering in the hallway just outside, went pale. Renata rubbed her wrists as the cuffs clicked open, not in relief. She had never once doubted this moment would come, but in the quiet, unhurried satisfaction of a woman who had simply been waiting for the world to catch up to a fact she already knew. Boots. Deputy Director Renata Ashworth-Coles, Batra said, for the benefit of everyone still standing frozen in the doorway. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division. Boots. She's been overseeing the federal review into this precinct for 4 months. Okafor closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. Boots. Then she turned and walked directly to Whitfield, who was standing at the end of the hall, still trying to process what he'd just heard, even now, searching his face for a version of events where he hadn't done anything wrong. Boots. Marcus, Okafor said. Badge and weapon now. You're suspended pending investigation, effective immediately. This is insane, Whitfield said, but his voice had lost every ounce of the certainty it carried 2 hours earlier. Boots. I was doing my job. She looked suspicious. She wouldn't comply. I followed procedure. You followed instinct, Okafor said, and your instinct was that a black woman in a hallway didn't belong there. Boots. That's not procedure, Marcus. That's exactly what 4 months of federal investigators have been building a file on. I want a lawyer, Whitfield said. Boots. You're going to need one, Okafor replied, and did not look back as she walked away. Boots. Whitfield stood alone at the end of the hallway for a long moment, badge and weapon now sitting in a manila envelope on the front desk, the fluorescent lights humming overhead the way they always had, except now every sound in the building seemed to carry differently. Sharper, more accusing, as if the walls themselves had been listening the whole time and were only now willing to say so. Boots. Kowalczyk passed him without a word, eyes down. Delgado wouldn't even look up from the paperwork in his hands. Whitfield opened his mouth once, as if to explain himself to the empty hallway, and then closed it again, because there was no one left standing there to explain himself to. Boots. Terrell Vance, still hovering near the booking desk, found himself staring at the red banner still glowing faintly on his monitor. Federal Law Enforcement Personnel. And thought, not for the first time that day, about how close he'd come to simply overriding the system error and processing her anyway, the way he'd been trained to when databases hiccuped. Boots. He didn't say anything about it out loud, but he saved a screenshot of that banner to a personal folder before his shift ended, the way a person keeps a photograph of the exact moment they understood something about themselves they hadn't wanted to know. Boots. Renata stepped out of the holding room a free woman, tote bag returned to her, badge wallet still zipped, magnolia pin still tucked safely in its corner, and walked down the same hallway where, 6 hours earlier, she had been dragged in cuffs. Boots. This time, every officer in the building watched her pass and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. Boots. Near the front desk, Kowalczyk and Delgado stood together, no longer laughing. Delgado wouldn't meet her eyes. Kowalczyk, to his credit, stepped forward. Boots. Ma'am, he said, I should have asked more questions before I put my hands on you. Renata studied him for a moment. Boots. You should have, she said, but you're the only one in that hallway who just said so out loud. Hold on to that. Boots. It matters more than you think. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was something, and Kowalczyk would carry the weight of that small, unfinished sentence for a long time. Boots. Outside in the parking lot, Yolanda Briggs was waiting by her car, the video from earlier still sitting unposted on her phone. Boots. She approached carefully, unsure if she was allowed to. I filmed it, Yolanda said. The whole thing. I wasn't sure if I should send it anywhere, or just, I don't know. Boots. Delete it. I didn't want to make things worse for you. Renata looked at her for a long moment, a stranger who had done the only thing she could, which was witness carefully and protect what little she could protect. Boots. You didn't make anything worse, Renata said. Send it to Agent Batra's office. It'll matter. And thank you for zipping the bag. Boots. Yolanda blinked. How did you know that was me? Because it was still zipped, Renata said, and allowed herself, for the first time all day, a small, genuine smile. Boots. The federal review of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg 3rd Ward precinct became public 11 days later. Boots. What the subpoenaed financial records revealed went far beyond one bad afternoon in a hotel lobby. A towing contract that funneled kickbacks through a shell company registered to Whitfield's brother-in-law, Boots. A pattern of seized asset processing fees that never made it into any official ledger. And most damning of all, a stack of internal complaint files, 4 of them stretching back 6 years, Boots. All involving Black and Latino residents stopped without cause, all quietly closed by Whitfield himself with no further action. Boots. Curtis Odom's name was the first to surface publicly. 34 years old, a warehouse supervisor with no prior record, stopped on Beatty's Ford Road for what the original report called a broken taillight that later photographs proved had never been broken at all. Boots. 11 days in county lockup on a possession charge built on evidence that, under federal review, could not be traced to any verified chain of custody. Boots. He'd lost his job before the charges were even formally dropped. Because 11 days was 11 days, his employer wasn't willing to hold the position open for. Boots. The second name was a 19-year-old named Priscilla Nwosu, stopped walking home from a night shift at a pharmacy, searched without cause, released without charges, and never told why. Boots. She hadn't filed a complaint. She told investigators later she hadn't believed one would matter. The third and fourth cases followed the same shape. Different names, same precinct, same captain quietly closing the file each time with a single stamped line. No further action warrant. Boots. When the pattern was laid out in full, 4 names, 6 years, 1 signature closing every door, even officers who had defended Whitfield for over a decade went quiet. Boots. Kowalczyk was the first to request a formal interview with Internal Affairs, unprompted, 3 days after the news broke. Boots. He told them everything he remembered about the hallway, about the printed attendee list with Renata's name circled in blue pen, about the words "something's off with her" that he now understood, with a kind of sick clarity, had never been about evidence at all. Boots. Whitfield was indicted on federal corruption charges 9 weeks later. He did not take a plea. Even in his final interview with Internal Affairs, transcribed and later entered into evidence, he maintained that he had followed his training and that any officer in that situation would have made the same call. Boots. He never once said the word sorry. Investigators who worked the case said that was the detail that stuck with them longest. Not the money, not the falsified reports, but a man who, staring at 4 years of documented harm, still could not bring himself to admit he'd been wrong about a single afternoon in a hotel hallway. Boots. At his sentencing hearing the following spring, a federal judge asked him directly whether he had anything to say to the 4 families whose lives his signature had rearranged. Boots. Whitfield stood, adjusted his jacket, and said only that he regretted how the situation was perceived. The judge, according to 3 reporters present in the courtroom, simply closed the file in front of her without responding, which somehow said more than any sentence could have. Boots. He was sentenced to 52 months on federal corruption and civil rights charges, stripped of his pension, and barred permanently from any future role in law enforcement anywhere in the country. Boots. His brass nameplate Surface Above Felfun was removed from his old desk within the week and never seen again. Boots. Captain Rosalind Okafor was appointed interim chief of the precinct and, in her first address to the department, read Renata's name and title out loud to a silent roof full of officers, then said only this: "We do not get to decide who belongs in a room based on how calm they look walking through it." Boots. That ends today in this building, or I promise you, it ends somewhere much worse. Curtis Odom got his old warehouse job back, though it took a formal letter from the U. Boots. S. Attorney's office and a written apology from the county to make it happen. Boots. He used part of his settlement to pay off his mother's mortgage in Rock Hill, a small, unremarkable house 3 streets over from the one where Delphine Ashworth had once counted. Traffic stops out loud to a 9-year-old girl who would grow up to sign the warrant that finally made someone answer for it. Boots. Neither Curtis nor Renata ever learned how close their 2 stories had run alongside each other for years without touching. Boots. Some things stay quietly connected and never need to be spoken aloud to matter. Boots. Priscilla Nwosu, the 19-year-old, stopped walking home from her pharmacy shift, filed the department's first formal complaint under the new Civilian Review Board Okafor established that winter, a board with actual subpoena power, actual public hearings, actual teeth. Boots. She was the first case it heard. She was not the last. 6 months after the arrest, Renata returned to Charlotte, not for a symposium this time, but for the department's first mandatory bias response training session, held in the same convention center on East Trade Street. Boots. She stood at the same podium where she'd been scheduled to deliver her keynote the year before, wearing the same kind of plain blazer, the magnolia pin fixed to her lapel where anyone could see it now. Boots. My mother used to tell me, Renata said, looking out over a room that included Terrell Vance, now promoted, sitting quietly in the third row, that people will decide who you are before you open your mouth. Boots. She was right, but she also told me something I didn't understand until much later, that the job isn't just proving them wrong for yourself. Boots. It's making sure the next person who walks into that room doesn't have to prove anything at all. She paused. Boots. The room was completely silent, the particular kind of silence that comes not from fear, but from people actually listening. Boots. I am not here today because I was arrested, she said. I'm here because a woman named Yolanda Briggs zipped my bag shut when she could have looked inside. Boots. Because a young officer named Terrell Vance ran a database check twice instead of assuming the first result was wrong. Boots. Because somewhere in this room, right now, there is someone deciding what kind of officer they're going to be the next time the room goes quiet, and everyone is waiting to see what they'll do. Boots. She let the silence hold a beat longer. Make it the right kind, she said, and stepped back from the podium. Boots. Nobody clapped right away. It took a few seconds, the particular kind of pause that happens when a room needs a moment to absorb something before it can respond to it. Boots. And then, slowly, the applause built. Not performative, not loud, but steady, the sound of people who understood they had just been asked to be better and had quietly decided to try. Boots. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe even a version of yourself standing quietly in that hallway, take a moment to like it, so it finds the person who needs to hear it next. Boots. Share it with someone who needs reminding that they are not invisible. And tell me in the comments. Have you ever stood in that hallway, watching, and had to decide which kind of person you were going to be? Boots. I read every single answer.